So yes, this is slightly rough around the edges because we've sort of amalgamated two slideshows. So please do bear with us. Two very short slideshows, yes. But this is going to be an interactive session. And this is actually essentially the formal in-person launch of the UK Fruit and Vegetable Coalition, which only began last October. And we've been sort of a bit like when you first plant a seed and all the root growth happens underground. We've been having all that root growth development, and this is probably the first shoot coming up for you to see. So Stephen's going to talk first and introduce what the UK Fruit and Vegetable Coalition is and what we stand for, what we're trying to do. And then I'm going to give a little bit of background about where it's come from and then what we've achieved so far. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our vision for what we're wanting to do. And then we're going to hand it over to you and do some breakout groups, because one of the questions that we're really exploring is how much emphasis to put on advocacy for organic agroecological growers to governments of the UK government, but also the devolved nations, and how much we actually need to be looking to find our own solutions, create our own solutions by connecting with markets, developing co-ops, looking at what examples of success are. So we'll come on to more of that later, but we're really wanting to ask you, because what we're doing here with the UK Fruit and Veg Coalition is representing your voices to the people in power and the decision makers. So we want to hear what you want us to be doing. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who is the chair of the UK Fruit and Vegetable Coalition, to explain a bit more about what it's about.
Right. When you said mouse, I'm on the keypad thinking, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm doing what? Hi, I'm Stephen Jacobs. I'm the coordinator for the Organic Growers Alliance, and as he said, I'm chairing the UK Fruit and Veg Coalition. We are a collection of organisations, so I'm with the OGA, B's with LWA. I've got a list of everybody who is a member at the moment. We've got a mission statement, and we're talking about organic agroecological. The reason for including the word agroecological is a whole spiel, and I think we do need to get into it, maybe not all the detail now, but two things. One is you don't have to be certified to be a member of the OGA, but you do need to be growing to organic principles. So I would like it, and our colleagues would like it to be embracing. But also, students of agroecology will know this, organic only goes so far. Agroecology talks about society, local governance, stuff that we believe is a really important part and that needs development. And how we work is across all of the nations of the UK. So we have to take into account that England is currently not a devolved area. And so the UK government has, one could say, over amount of influence considering. So we need to take account of that. And also we want to work within sociocratic methods. So I've just put a couple of key things up there about what sociocracy means. But again, we could go into detail about it. There's a whole spiel on here you don't need to read, and B's going to go into the history of this, but these are the members, and I did a with the logos, which I really enjoyed doing last night. Apologies if your logo is a little bit smaller or bigger than you would like. So you'll see that on this slide, We've got groups that are national groups, groups that are based in a particular region. That's not the key. The key is that we all want to come together under a set of principles. And we'll move on to that shortly, but how did we get here? Back over to B.
Okay, so it feels worth just doing a little bit of history because back in 2017, the Food Foundation had a campaign called Peas Please, which some of you might remember. And the aim of that was to get people to eat more fruit, more vegetables, not fruit so much, but getting people to eat more vegetables. And they had a series of annual summits called the Vegetable Summits. And they were quite fun. They didn't take themselves too seriously and had lots of people dressed up as vegetables. And they had lots of different corporations. They were quite corporate, sort of making pledges about what they were going to do to get people to eat more vegetables. So they had caterers, they had retailers, they had a production panel. And actually, the production panel was in some ways the weakest of all. There were no pledges really being made. There was the various DEFRA ministers there. But it just seemed like the weakest link in the whole thing. There were all these organizations pledging what they were going to do to get people to eat more vegetables, but nobody was really talking seriously about the production. And so afterwards, we were talking with the Food Foundation, and they had contacts with various organizations, including the grassroots organizations like Land Workers Alliance and OGA and Growing Communities, but also large-scale organizations like the NFU and the British Growers Association and British Apples and Pears. And DEFRA basically said, if you can organize all of these groups to come together into one body, then we're willing to talk to you and set up a thrice-yearly round table, which became known as the Edible Horticulture Round Table. I always had this wonderful image of a big disc of carrot with us all sitting around it, nibbling bits out of the edge. But anyway, this lasted for about 6 years. It was in some ways quite a struggle, as you can imagine, having organic and agroecological grassroots organizations trying to meet and agree anything with the NFU and the British Growers Association. And the issue of migrant workers seemed to come up every year with great regularity and seemed to dominate the discourse. But we tried to hold our own. We did hold our own. And what feels like the crowning achievement of what we did was when DEFRA were announcing an English horticulture strategy, we got together and we actually did manage to produce a document called Cultivating Success, which brought together our vision of what we would like as UK growers to be in the horticulture strategy. And we worked really hard on that. It was a huge achievement to get agreement to publish something under all of our names. And we proudly presented this to the DEFRA Hort team at one of these round tables. And they were all being a little bit cagey and strange. And we only found out afterwards that they'd actually pulled the plug on the whole idea of a horticulture strategy 2 months before, which made us all pretty fed up. And unanimously, the one thing that we did really manage pretty much to decide on was to say, well, if you're not going to even bother to tell us that there's not going to be a horticulture strategy, then what's the point of this round table? So we walked out. That was the end of the Edible Horticulture Round Table. So then it wasn't officially the end of the Fruit and Vegetable Alliance. I don't think I mentioned that that was the name of the body of all of us together. We were the Fruit and Vegetable Alliance. But it kind of did fizzle out after that, because the main motivation for all of these groups sticking together was to have this access to DEFRA. So the various organic and agroecological organizations kept meeting for a while, and it seemed at that stage like really the only pot of funding on the table was the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme, which you needed to be part of a producer organisation to access. So we spent about a year as what we call the Agroecological Fruit and Veg Alliance, meeting to try and figure out a way that we could access the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme, and whether we could sort of set up cooperatives that weren't selling into supermarkets and still access some of the funds. That ended up proving a little bit fruitless, and we didn't get that far with it. But in the process, we did really start to work together as a group of organic agroecological organizations much more effectively. And it was actually quite a relief to not be having to negotiate the space with non-organic and much larger scale growers. So last October, October 24, we got some funding to organize an in-person meetup to have a strategy day. And so all the organizations that are now members of the UK Fruit and Vegetable Coalition came together to work out how we could work together more effectively. And we spent a very enjoyable day sort of discussing missions and aims and names and all of that kind of thing. And out of that was born the Fruit and Vegetable Coalition with, I think it's probably on one of Stephen's slides, but our mission statement. Yes, if you could put that up. So we're working together to create a future in which more fruit and veg are produced in the UK. We reduce our reliance on imports. Agroecological growing and organic growing becomes a rewarding, valued, and accessible career path for many more people. And everyone can eat and enjoy healthy food that is produced without wrecking the environment and the climate. So it's a pretty ambitious set of aims, because the agroecological aspect of what we're doing is really trying to buck this trend of organic being seen as a niche, expensive kind of food that only the wealthy can afford. We really want to be producing more veg and fruit in this country that everyone can afford. That's absolutely foundational principle of agroecology. And we're really open to exploring any ways that this can be achieved, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face. I'm going to hand over to Stephen.
So we need to go back a wee bit, but so that is it's obvious. The little finger pointing at you, that's because it's not me going, right, it's about its grassroots. So there's two forms of advocacy that we're trying to achieve. One is to the policymakers, as B said, and from the painful lesson we learned when Mark Spencer decided to drop a UK horticulture strategy that he had promised, but also the way the civil service were told not to tell us until after we produced a report that was supposed to feed into that strategy. We thought, well, there are other ways, but we still we feel obliged to try to keep trying to get the message across to the people that have their hands on the levers of power. So we'll go into more detail about all of this, but one of the ways is to talk to the MPs. And we need your MPs, if you're up for it, so that you can, with us, contact members of parliament, people in local governance, so that we can start advocating with that one voice, as Pete said, rather than a lone voice, and say to them, this is a really good set of values. This can be achieved in your area or constituency or whatever it is. We want to work with you to help achieve that. Here are some successes that you could look to model on. So that's kind of where we're going. want your slide to be? You wanna... We've been over that, but then that finishes neatly on that.
Yeah, no, I told you it was grassroots. Yeah, that's not to say that grassroots is disorganized. I'll just take that on the chin. So yes, what have we done so far? I just didn't recognize the slide I'd made. What we've done so far, we've actually achieved quite a bit in the last year. Initially, one of the promises that Sustain made at the strategy day was to establish a roundtable on making farm payments work for holdings of 5 hectares and less. And they kept that promise, and we got off to a flying start looking at that. And that led to a survey, which probably quite a few of you filled in, to look at how SFI was working for growers. And amazingly, actually, I think about 70 people responded. And it did show that SFI, despite the threshold having been removed, was still pretty inaccessible. And while we were actually in the middle of doing that survey, the 11th of March cutoff on SFI happened, and it was all put on hold. So that was all quite frustrating. But we're not going to be daunted. We're here, and we're getting on with growing veg, and we really want to make sure that people get to eat them. We also met Susie Russell from CSA Network, and myself and Kath Dalmany from Sustain, met with the Agriculture Minister, Daniel Zeitner, and Senior Civil Servant Emily Miles at the Oxford Real Farming Conference to pitch the idea of a particular kind of farm payment scheme for small-scale growers that would be much easier and simpler to administer. And we've been in dialogue about that. I've also been feeding into the Welsh Government's Sustainable Farming Scheme consultation. They actually have been looking at how to make that accessible for horticulture and really make a targeted horticulture payment scheme. And although they announced a series of, well, they announced the core scheme in July, what we fed into, as I believe, is actually going to be in the optional scheme, which I don't think they've made any public announcements about. So I'm still hopeful that all the work we did, and that was coordinated by Farming Connect and Lantra. So I'm hopeful that that will still lead to something good for horticulture and growers in Wales. In Northern Ireland, we've got a small but very active group of Land Workers Alliance members in Northern Ireland, and they've been working this year on creating a policy brief, which we're hoping to have ready by the end of next week and to launch at Fields Good, which is their equivalent in Northern Ireland of groundswell. So we're going to be, that's got about 5 case studies of organic growers in Northern Ireland. So they're really doing some great work over there, but again, being done on a shoestring at the moment. And then coming up in November, during the period that between the demise of the Fruit and Veg Alliance and the UK Fruit and Veg Coalition coming into existence, we've had the ability in Land Workers Alliance to meet quarterly with the DEFRA horticulture team to just chat about horticulture and just keep us on their horizon. And at the last meeting we had in late June, we'd been telling them about this coalition, and they were really interested in the last meeting to hear more about it and said, well, we'd be really open to meeting with you. And we were chatting about it, and I'd assumed it would be another online meeting. And then I was really pleasantly surprised when they said, well, we'd like to have an in-person meeting with you. So we're going to be meeting with the DEFRA Hort team and a number of us from the coalition on the 5th of November. And then another quite exciting thing that's coming up is we've got a parliamentary drop-in event on the 22nd of November. And that's where we're going to be wanting you to contact your MPs to encourage them to come along to it, because we're going to be laying on a buffet lunch, and we'll have various displays about what the Fruit and Veg Coalition is all about. We're organising this in conjunction with Bridging the Gap, which is a project that Sustain and Growing Communities have been running over the last 3 years. And they've been working at how to actually bridge this income divide and get organic vegetables and fruit to people on lower incomes. And they've got a number of pilots. They're just coming to the end of this project, but they've been supporting the ongoing work of Welsh veg into schools. They've got a really exciting project in Scotland called Give Peas a Chance, getting peas, dried peas into school meals. They've got various voucher schemes based on the Alexandra Rose schemes. So they're going to be presenting the results of these pilots, but we're going to be having a lunch beforehand in the Jubilee Room in the House of Commons to invite MPs to and to chat to them about what the Fruit and Veg Coalition is and what we're trying to do, and to really put the fact that there are organic, agroecological, small-scale growers in existence, because amazingly, despite the fact that it feels like we've been talking about this for years, it sometimes feels like we've actually not really managed to persuade people that there's anything between allotment holders and large-scale veg growers who are selling to supermarkets. So the first thing we've got to do is just really persuade the powers that be that we've got solutions to many, many of the problems, such as the health crisis, the escalating costs of ill health, diabetes, obesity, that we can address climate change through having carbon negative farms, that we can improve biodiversity, that we can draw people into horticulture, because there's a massive deficit of people actually wanting to work in horticulture in the UK. So we've got many, many messages we've got to get across, and this is our chance to do so. So if you can get in touch with your MP to, when we send out the messages about invites, and get them to come to it. It would be great if we could collect an email list of people who are here and who are willing to. I'll send around a piece of paper in a minute to collect people's email addresses, but we're trying to be the voice of you guys who are actually doing the amazing, valuable work on the ground. And I was thinking this morning about what drives me to keep doing this, and it's because I just recognize the amount of skill and knowledge and passion that growers have. And at the moment, I think it's quite tough. I mean, the financial situation is really, really tough. And I just find it tragic if people started to drift away from organic growing because they can't make it work. We've got to find a way to keep people and make this grow to fill in the import gap that we've got at the moment. So I'm going to hand back over to Stephen.
25th of November is, it's the week after the Wales Real Food and Farming Conference, which will be at Pencoed campus near Bridgend. In a sec. So we'll be contacting you, but do contact us. If we can get your email address, great. I'm Organic Growers Alliance, Bees LWA. We've got Growing Communities Soil Association. Hugh from the Soil Association is the UK Fruit and Veg Coalition Secretary. He would be here, but he's doing the soil test in the other tent. So we're reaching across, and it's all about trying to get a focus on smaller scale, all on horticulture, and if we can, to encourage younger generations to get involved and to get support for those people to get involved. And just before we go into this slide, that point on the economics, we cannot compete against Trumpian globalization, so we don't. We build networks, we support each other, we have solidarity, we bring ourselves, our collective shoulders to lean on. That's the way forward, in our view, certainly in my view. So it's about how we can get those, for instance, the beneficial climate messages across to an MP is good, but if the MP is also thinking about employment in their area, okay, let's look at the area. Could we tailor a message that would be suitable and would stand up that MP might hear? It's how we do it. And then the other side of that coin is, what do you actually want to hear us talk about? And we're talking about it with our colleagues, as I say, the Soil Association, whoever.
Looking at the time, I've realized that we've really significantly overrun on the talky bit, but it would be great if we could go into some breakout groups. I was going to suggest that we went into them according to the 4 nations, but I think for speed, if you could divide yourselves into 4 groups, because we've got 4 people to take notes. And then we'll have about 12 minutes to do that. And then if you can take notes, I think we won't have a plenary at the end. We'll come back together, but if the note takers can give me and Stephen the notes, then we'll write them up. And I'm going to ask Pete, could you go around with a piece of paper to collect email addresses, please, while we're doing that? So then we can have a mail list to keep you in touch, if you want to be kept in touch with what we're doing. So yes, if you can divide yourselves into 4 groups, and Gina is going to scribe for one, Carolyn is going to scribe for another, Stephen will scribe for another, and then I'll scribe for the last. So Stephen, do you want to go over into that area, and then I'll come over here? Okay, brilliant. So we've got about 10 to 12 minutes. And if you have any other ideas that you don't manage to get in, please come and talk to me or Stephen afterwards. Brilliant, thank you. I just wanted to make one little point that I forgot to make earlier, but I feel is really important, which is in the membership of the coalition, as well as growers organizations and campaigning organizations like Sustain, we also have various marketing organizations, not marketing in the sort of slick sense, but organizations that are really modeling a different way of selling veg, so like Growing Communities, Organic North, and Regather. And I think they're a really important part of the mix, and I just wanted to point out that they're there in the organization alongside the practical growing organizations. And it's really important that we are all working together, because the marketing and getting this produce into the mouths of customers is as much part of it as the growing. So I think Pete's collected lots of email addresses. You'll probably hear from us in late September or early October when we email you to ask you to invite your MPs to the drop-in event. And we still need to work out how we keep in touch with individuals. There's quite a lot that's still needing to be worked out, because we don't actually have any significant funds for the Fruit and Vegetable Coalition. We rely on the different organizations and the people that work with them coming together to do this work. We might manage to get some funding at some point, but at the moment the funding sort of environment is quite sparse and scarce. So I think we are going to be relying very much on grassroots action and goodwill to get this going. But it's been really encouraging to see the interest. So thank you very much for coming along. And please do come and talk to us during the rest of the gathering if you've got things you didn't manage to say.
B, hold on. We have got a few minutes left.
Oh,
yeah.
Have we? Oh, yeah. I thought we were finishing at
1 o'clock. Is it 1 o'clock?
Oh, it's
1:15. So we've got 10 minutes. So if you two are happy and you're not too stretched.
Okay.
Is there any questions? Because I think it would be good to hear if there's any,
Just what people think of a question, just on the, because we haven't got a website, but on the thing of funding and everything, our friends at the Food Foundation are kindly hosting a few bits and pieces for us, and we can give you the address. It's, if you put into a search engine, I recommend DuckDuckGo, UK FNVC and Food Foundation, you'll probably just point you to the page.
So, anybody want to ask a question? Nope. Just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Will, and I do grassroots food growing around here. I just want to be clear what you're actually hoping to achieve by like putting this to government. What are you actually expecting in response? Is it more actually about like what you described before seemed like actually quite a bad experience of a round table where you were kind of betrayed and just cut out. So in this case, is it actually just more about making your voice heard and showing like giving it a voice, but actually just doing your own thing? Or are you actually expecting that if you present it in a way, they're going to turn around and say like, "Oh, we're going to give you this land, or we're going to give you this funding"? But, what's
No, it's a good question. So we've learnt, talk to central government until you're blue in the face. I don't think positive change is going to come. Talk to the MPs and their local constituencies and try and mobilise that way. You're not going to get a radical change overnight, but you can start to move things in a certain direction. In Wales, when the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was first thought of, everybody thought there's no way that's going to get passed. People agitated in their regions within Wales, it got passed. There's a similar thing in Scotland. There isn't one in England. Doesn't mean to say there couldn't be, but we feel, whilst we're talking to these MPs, we could influence their little area, and then they could take our argument to central government. Maybe it won't work, but the other thread is that while we're doing that, we're working together. We're getting to know each other. We're finding somebody might say, I've got some funding for this. Will wants a new set of tools, for instance. He hasn't got funding. We might be able to access it over here. So it's not just central government. It's more about finding out what is available that you haven't yet heard of.
Thanks, Will. I'll just add to that quickly. The 5 hectare rule was a success. So if you didn't know about that, maybe they'll tell you about that. Yeah. So that has been a success. Mm-hmm. They have listened.
Yes. I would also just add to that if we're not in the room when there are consultations and so forth that happen, then we haven't got that democratic voice. I mean, it has actually, to be honest, been a very demoralizing last couple of years, because it feels like there've been so many consultations and yet actually things just go on business as usual. But the thing is, if we're not there speaking out with a voice, then our voice isn't at the table. So it feels like we do need to carry on working at that level. But because of the setbacks, we're also looking at other ways to work. And that's really where we're at with the discussion, is how much effort do we put on the advocacy and how much do we put on the other efforts? And one of the things that I feel very inspired by is Sustainable Food Places, which Sustain and the Soil Association and Food Matters have been running for about 10, 15 years now. And they've now got about 200 local food partnerships all the way across the UK. And they're partnerships between local business, local government, academics, and civic society. And within those, I think they'll have access to people who could be potential markets. And I think one way that I'd really like us to be going in the next few years is exploring how we can connect growers to the local food partnerships and find really plausible ways of selling their food and getting their food to a whole range of people. And so we're looking at things like innovative CSA models. Some of the CSA models that are happening on the continent, in Germany and in the Netherlands, are much, much more radical than ours, whereby people are encouraged to pledge how much they can afford, or even it's pegged to how much they're earning. So people are asked to pay for their veg box equivalent to what they would get paid per hour in whatever their job is. So there are some quite radical ideas out there. And while we need to keep doing the advocacy, we really want to look at those. And that's why it would be great to get more capacity to do this work. So we need to be working on both of those levels.
So just wanted to about sort of what you're doing in terms of growing
Yes. Okay. Brilliant. Well, at the moment, we're not doing that ourselves. I think that's probably something that the OGA are already doing well and Land Workers Alliance are doing well. And one thing we really don't want the coalition to turn into is something that's repeating what the individual organizations are doing, because all of our organizations are doing really valuable work and have different strengths in their own rights. So I think that's something that can be done by the individual organizations. And already there are other collaborations like TALC, which is called the Agricultural Learning Collective, Agroecology Learning Collective. That's doing a lot on training, and that has many of the same coalition members. So we're working together. I see it as a sort of weaving web of these different organizations and their strengths coming together to really strengthen each other, but then also having specialization and sustainability and diversity, which we all know as growers.
Sue?
Quick point that Liberal Party agricultural man is the fellow who was the leader. Nick, somebody, gosh, I've got his name. He's Tim, that's it. He's a farmer from the Lake District, and he's got all the right ideas, just so that people know. I'm sure you know.
Sue?
Okay, so the most important thing for me is to get the public to recognize that if they don't buy British, the farmers will disappear. So when I was in Latvia, I saw a small advert saying buy Latvian food or the farmers will go. So we've basically, at Farms Not Factories, been interviewing for 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes farmers like you to say, who are you, what are you doing, what are the hurdles, few of them, and what are the solutions? And it goes to 70,000 of our followers. Goes much, much further through other people, and 10,000 people who answer our emails. So if we can just get people to care about us, to look for farm food, so please come and talk to me. Do a piece to camera.
Thank you, nice plug. But yeah, also a very, very valid point. Anybody else? We might have 1 minute, 2 minutes. Okay. That's enough. Enough is enough. So thank you so much. Thank you. Your participation has been absolutely invaluable. I know these two would concur with that. Almost everyone signed up, and no disrespect to anyone who didn't sign up, it's absolutely fine not to sign up for email address, but it's really good to have feedback from people who come to these sort of things. You know, it's the most important thing, actually. I think B would agree with that. What I would also like to say is this is not easy work. You know, I've been involved with these two for quite a long time, and they keep going, you know, and honestly, I tell you how, it's very hard growing organic vegetables, number one, surviving, number two, but actually doing this political work is dead hard. So thank you, you two. Thank you, thank you. And have a great gathering, everybody. Thank you.